Molto bene. Very well. Dear Tram friends, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I'm glad to welcome you to another appointment in this cycle of international video conferences dedicated to tramways and other means of transport. Today's presentation will be made by Lars Richter from Germany. Lars is the president of the BDBA and also an ATTS member. And he will talk about the history of tramways in his home city, Hamburg, that used to have a big tramway system, but unfortunately today it's the only big German city without tramways. This presentation will be done in English, and at the end of the evening there will be space for any questions in English or in Italian, but you can also use the chat in every moment during the presentation. The program of the forthcoming presentation until November 2025 is available on our internet site. And the next one is scheduled for Tuesday, 25 February, and it will deal with the rail transport in Catalonia, Spain. Before giving the floor to Lars, I have an announcement to make, just the first one, because as many of you already know, in December in Turin, we'll organize a big international conference dedicated to tram museums and tramway association worldwide. So we'll let you know the program as soon as possible, and you're invited to attend if you like. It would be a good opportunity to meet friends, to exchange experiences in this field, and also to make some tourism, because that period in Italy is a period full of tourists, and there are many things to see in Europe and in Italy too. So why not to come to Italy and to conjugate tramways and culture and tourism? But we'll talk about it later in the other evenings. Thank you. Now let me repeat everything in Italian. Cari amici, benvenuti a questo nuovo appuntamento con il nostro ciclo di videoconferenze internazionali dedicate ai tram e agli altri mezzi di trasporto. Questa sera abbiamo da Amburgo il nostro socio amico Lars Richter, che già ben conosciamo, che ci parlerà della storia dei tram nella sua città natale Amburgo, che pur avendo avuto una grande rete tranviaria, purtroppo oggi è l'unica città tedesca che invece i tram non ce l'ha più. La presentazione sarà fatta in inglese, alla fine della serata ci sarà spazio per domande di qualsiasi genere, in inglese o in italiano, e se volete usate la chat durante la presentazione. Vi ricordo che il programma completo delle prossime videoconferenze fino a tutto novembre 2025 è disponibile sul nostro sito internet. La prossima presentazione è programmata per martedì 25 febbraio e riguarderà i trasporti su rotaia in Catalogna, Spagna. Grazie, ed ora do la parola a Lars. Lars, if you want to start, it's up to you.
Roberto, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Guten Abend. Not everybody heard it. We tried this screen sharing for a while. I've got a new computer. Unfortunately, my Windows computer is apparently unable to enlarge the picture to the same size that I see, because I'm screen sharing now. It covers most of my screen here, but I understand that it's a little smaller what you see, and we haven't found out a way to make it bigger. We can make it smaller, and we can make it much larger, but that would be too large and you would be missing things. So that's starting with that. I won't be able to look at your chat messages, unfortunately, because of the screen sharing here. If there's anything you would like to ask me, maybe do that afterwards. and I will start this presentation. This is a PDF file. I'll have to scroll. I cannot jump from page to page. As you can see, we are looking at Hamburg trams, and if you look at the date, you will probably recognize that the history of the Hamburg trams is much older. We are going mainly to look at pictures of electric trams, and the dates you see here on the start page are the page of electric service in Hamburg. I will show you a few images of the other modes that we had, of course, horse trams, etc. But the main part of this presentation is going to look at mostly color images. There are some black and white images as well of the modern Hamburg trams, the ones maybe you remember if you have ever visited us before 1978 or up to 1978. There will not be many slides that I'm showing. There's only 3, and this is really here to give you an overview. And as you can see here, we had in Hamburg directly, we had 3 types of tram operational modes here. There were the horse trams starting in 1866. One of the lines was converted to steam in 1878. And then from 1894, we have electric trams, and they ran, of course, all the way to the end. What I'm mentioning here, line 4 is Cuxhaven. Cuxhaven in 1914 was part of the Hansestadt Hamburg. Later in 1937, when the Great Hamburg Law was passed by the Nazis, Hamburg lost some of those outlying territories, and Cuxhaven, of course, is a very long way away. I think it's about 2 hours by train towards Bremen. But they had trams, and as you can see, they ran from the 6th of July to the 2nd of August, because then World War I broke out, and they never ran again afterwards. They were what we call in German Benzol trams. I think benzene is the English translation to that. So they were using some kind of fuel. And I found one photo I can show you. We also had interurbans, not long distance interurbans. We had an interurban that ran from the city of Altona to Blankenese. Didn't run very long because people used the S-Bahn later, because it took the same way a few streets away from the trams, and it was much faster. And it broke this company, and it closed down in 1928. And we also have a railway that used electric trams, which is the Alt-Rahlstedt to Volksdorf and to Wohldorf tram. And on the next few pages, we'll see more of it, and I got some pictures of it as well. We start briefly with the horse tram companies. At the bottom, I've mentioned 3 cities abbreviations, because when we talk about the early history of Hamburg trams, we are talking about different cities. Hamburg, as I said, in 1937 became quite large. We absorbed a lot of Prussian territories and cities and towns and communities, but we also had to give away a few smaller ones. But before that, there was the city of Altona in Holstein, the Holstein province of Prussia. You had Hamburg itself, fairly small really, and you also had Wandsbek to the east of Hamburg, which was also in Prussia. And we had a couple of companies here. The Pferdeeisenbahngesellschaft was the first one, the PEG in 1866. And in brackets, I've indicated here that all these were absorbed into other companies that we either see on this page or we're going to see on the next page. The Hamburg-Altona Pferdebahngesellschaft ran from Hamburg to Altona, which of course were 2 different cities. And in red, I've indicated where they actually operated. The largest company was the Straßeneisenbahngesellschaft, the Street Railway Company, SEG, from 1880, later absorbed into the Hochbahn. We had another small line, Hamburg-Altona Northwestern Tramway Company, later renamed, that also ended up under SEG ownership. And then you had another Hamburg to Altona line And all these smaller lines usually only had a couple of lines. Some of them only had one line. But they were all important enough. And of course, the cities emerged from, I mean, you could cross the border without recognizing it. You would think you're still in the same city, but you were in another city. That, of course, later changed. And with the electric companies, some of the names appear again. Some were renamed. And as you can see at the bottom in red, in large letters, we have many more cities now. This is all, of course, still before 1937. Altona, we already know Harburg is new. It never had anything else than electric trams. It's to the very south of Hamburg. It was part of the Hanover province of Prussia. You have Hamburg, you have Rahlstedt, which is even beyond Wandsbek, further east than Wandsbek, was also a Prussian town. And we also had Wilhelmsburg, and Wilhelmsburg later merged with Harburg. And of course, all of them in 1937 became part of Hamburg. And the penultimate company here, which ran the trams taking over from the SEG, is of course the Hamburger Hochbahn, which operated everything from 1920 to 1978. I did produce a small map here. It's difficult to zoom in. I mean, it's a large city. To the very left here, to the east, to the west, sorry, of Hamburg, we have Altona, which was a Prussian province, covering quite a big portion here. Then you have Hamburg itself in the middle. And then on the right, there is Wandsbek, which had the steam tram. And east of that, even further out, was Rahlstedt. And Harburg and Wilhelmsburg are to the south of the Elbe River, and they don't really even show on this map. Also indicating a bit that these were quite unimportant towns then. And all here in the harbor area, there was a lot of industry and shipping stuff, and the city was even further down. But eventually it got connected by a tram. My own collection includes mostly color images of modern trams. So I had to take some of these pictures off the internet. I mean, the horse trams, I don't have a picture of every single company. They all look very similar, all very much alike. Quite a large network was established. The line to Wandsbek was always very busy, quite a big town, then smaller than Altona. And it was so big that eventually they even had steam trams running there. All the various companies had their own rolling stock. Here's the steam tram to Wandsbek. No photos available. It was too early for photos, I think. So you had this steam tramway locomotive pulling one or two, I think maybe three at the max, double-deck trailers open. Probably not very pleasant to sit on the top deck with a steam loco in front of you. You get all the soot and all the smoke in your eyes, but they could move many more people than compared to what they had before, because they just put this equipment on the old horse tram line that went from Hamburg to Wandsbek. Here is, there's a photo. It's not the best one. It's actually a postcard the Hamburger Hochbahn published some years ago. Quite a small locomotive and heavy trailers. This is the tramway that ran from Altona to Blankenese. Blankenese itself later was part of Altona. Originally, it was part of Holstein-Pinneberg, but many towns were moved and merged into larger communities. So this was a single line running from Altona outside the railway station all the way to the very wealthy and now extremely wealthy suburb of Blankenese, which is quite hilly. And it ran to the station there. All the cars were sold later. The Hamburger Hochbahn, when they closed down because all the passengers had deserted this line and took the electric S-Bahn, which was much faster and more fun, I guess, to ride. The Hochbahn took over the track and the machinery and electric station and stuff, but it was all sold off. So the Hamburger Hochbahn, HHA, never operated this line. They ended up with it, but they liquidated it, so to speak. Just a brief excursion here this is also Blankenese. They experimented with trolleybuses. It's not part of our talk here, but to complete the picture, Hamburg itself also had trolleybuses. This is just one example here. We even had double-deckers in the 50s. Not many of them and not many lines. For years, I've been trying to get a color photo of it. They're quite rare, but there is this brochure that the manufacturer produced, so you can see the livery, the typical Hamburger Hochbahn, cream and red, cream before the war, yellowish cream, and then after the war, they introduced this livery. Now we're going to look at this little electric railway, which ran from Rahlstedt to Hamburg, actually. And as you can see, it looked like a tramway. Legally, it was a railway. It did run on the side of the road for much of the way, like what we see here. And there are pictures of one tram, or they also had an electric locomotive pulling a large number of these double-deck trailers, because this is what people used to do in those days. There was no television, there was no other amusement. They went out, especially on the weekends. They went for a ride in the countryside, and this company here offered them service into the wooded areas north of Hamburg. I actually live there and not very far from the old line. This was privately owned. It ran from Rahlstedt, the Prussian State Railway Station, and then all the way up north. And eventually, like Blankenese, the tramway, the interurban to Blankenese, it experienced a large lack of passengers, because the Hamburger Hochbahn, what is the metro now here in Hamburg, or subway to our North American friends, an elevated electric rapid transit system, more or less ran the same line, not all the way, but at least it ended up in the north where this tram used to go to. And all the passengers, of course, used the elevated line, which was much faster. So they cut this line down more and more. And in the end, here's a picture of this electric locomotive with quite a number of, well, you could call them tourists. They are locals, of course, that are either going to some special event or just enjoying the facility of an open air ride. Very, very crowded. Later, the remaining part of this little interurban, which technically was a railway, or legally was a railway, but as you can see here, one of the old trams on the left, what the Hamburger Hochbahn took over this system and introduced Hamburg tram cars. But instead of operating them with a trolley pole, as all the Hamburg electric trams carried, these cars here, I think there were three or four of them, of the V2 type, were brought out here, and they put a pantograph on them. And then they shuttled from Volksdorf. And I think in the end, when they cut it back to Ohlstedt, it was maybe a sixth or a seventh of the original length of the line survived from the 50s to the 60s, when unfortunately it closed down. Another picture of this car, which survives today. And there were attempts made when it closed in, I can't find the piece of paper, 1965-ish, I think, 63 or 67, it closed down, and enthusiasts in Germany, more or less still in existence today. The society is the VVM. They run this trolley museum, streetcar tram museum on the Baltic coast, north of Kiel. They were involved in it. There were other societies. Later they merged into this VVM society, and they were trying to take over this line for tourist service, for running it as a preserved tramway. But the Senate of the city of Hamburg, our government, said, nah, that is, you don't know what to do. And so they scrapped everything except for 2 cars. And the building survives. Here's the same car, number 5, but originally it was number 3. It was sitting very close to the line here in Volksdorf for many years, but now it has been put under cover. The VVM also has a little locomotive railroad shed here in Aumühle, and also the double-deck trailer is preserved there. This is the end of the line with one of those ex-Hamburg city trams in Wohldorf. And here is a picture of the trams, of one of the trams running. Always very difficult to figure out which number it is. They had a small little number painted on them on the side, but most pictures you can't see them. I think what we see here, I think it all survived. And the double-deck trailer here wasn't quite finished. I mean, it wasn't restored then. You see there's some bits missing upstairs, but it was in fairly good condition. And I think we're very glad that this survived. Here's this other tram that later went to the line at the Schönberger Strand Tram Museum in the Baltic coast, north of Kiel. And it's now back at the terminus. And if we go back a few pictures here, this is the spot, more or less here. This was the terminus at Wohldorf by the depot, by the railway station, and that's where it sits now. It's got, it's recovered now. It's completely covered with a tarp. For a few years, as you can see here, it carried the old cream livery of the Hochbahn before the war. It never operated on this line in this livery, but unfortunately, it's there, but it's not restored. At least it's undercover. Maybe one day it'll get restored, which would be nice. But it's sitting on its where it used to operate last. The only picture I could find, which was large enough to be shown here, of this benzene tram in Cuxhaven, is this one here. They came second-hand from a line in Berlin, and after having run only very briefly on really what was the military railway in Cuxhaven, and when they got the permission to operate these so-called trams there, they ran with a caveat that if the military wanted the line, they would have to terminate service immediately. And then, of course, the war broke out, and they did stop because the military didn't need the railway lines, the tracks, and they never ran again afterwards. They got sold, I think, to Moers, another system in Germany, but none survived, as far as I know. A small number only of trams there, not a very big city. Here we have one of the Hamburg trams, electric. I think this is from the SEG, the largest company, which absorbed all the other lines, some electric and most horse before, of course. And as you can see, lots of people working on it, drivers, conductors. They had trailers. They had to run round trailers to go back at the end of the line. Later, the Hochbahn introduced loops, balloon loops everywhere. We had a large variety of two-axle motor cars and trailer cars. And later they were called the Z1, Z for Zweiachser, which means two-axle. It was the Z1 type and the Z2 type, and a lot of them were modernized over the years. And here you see a picture of the elevated under construction on the harbor front, so to speak, with one of the trams. And for a long time, of course, they both operated there. Eventually, the trams were closed, and the elevated is still there. It doesn't look much different. I mean, of course, they've completed it, so there is not a work site there anymore. But the viaduct you see in the background is more or less what you still see there today. Here is a picture of Rödingsmarkt. It shows a variety of trams. This is before the elevated was built, and I think everything in this picture here more or less got demolished, except for the building, the large tall building on the right, which unfortunately got damaged in the war, in the last war. So they later built a big subway station here, elevated station, or Hochbahn station as we call it. And I think the next picture is the very same spot, looking at a different angle. This big house is on the right, we just saw. And here the elevated railway is already in operation. And the tram you see coming in from the left, from this street, which is called Großer Burstar, was the street in Hamburg that had the most services. And in the heyday of the trams, there was a tram every few seconds. So it was difficult to cross the road because there were trams from at least 2 different companies, I think, operating there, maybe 3. And it was very, very busy, of course. There were no buses. I mean, they came much later. So the mode of transport in Hamburg in those early days was the tram, mostly carried a large number of passengers. Then the U-Bahn, operated by the Hochbahn, which means elevated railway. It's still there today. And later, of course, we got the electric S-Bahn, the suburban, run by the state railway, first the Prussian and then the German state railway. Still there today. Now it's DB. And of course, we have thousands of buses today and no trams. Here is a nice picture from the early days of the Hohe Luft depot with all the staff sitting on the roof and everything. Quite impressive in those days. Hamburg, of course, had a lot of war damage in the Second World War, and some of the buildings you see in these old postcard views here have disappeared. Unfortunately, Hamburg never really rebuilt anything that either got burned down, because in the old days we had fires a lot, like in so many other European cities and in North American cities as well. But the nice brown building on the left, which was one of the main post offices, is still there today. No longer a post office, but it's still there. You can also see it's a colorized postcard here. The color for many years of most of the trams, especially the SEG, was green and yellow. Green on top and yellow at the bottom. And here we have a very early view of the landing bridges, Landungsbrücken as it's called. Later they built a big terminal there for all the harbor ferries, but it was used as such already. In this view here, you can see these bridges going down to pontoons where the harbor ferries were transporting the workers into the harbor, because it was a very busy port, still is today, but of course many more people were employed in the early days. Containerization later, of course, made a lot of them obsolete, but they came there on the U-Bahn, on the Hochbahn, which later was built on the left here, where you're seeing the green, the grass. That's where the elevated came there. Now we also have an S-Bahn electric underground station there, and buses, of course, and the ferries. They still run ferries today, and you can use them with a regular transport transit ticket. Only the trams are gone and some of these buildings. One of the features of the Hamburg trams, which I think is fairly known, it's a bit difficult for me to find the right, yeah, a bit tricky here to scroll, were post boxes. For a very long time, most of the trams carried post box. I think mainly the lines that went past the railway station, the central railway station, which you can actually see in the background here, some of the buildings, because this is where they had a little building connected to the railway post office. And here you see the central railway station, the Hauptbahnhof, and the little building on the right, in the right bottom corner. That's the original building used for the post office. It got rebuilt, I think, at least twice. There's still a building there today. For many years, it was known as the Nivea Pavilion, because later, after the war, when it probably got war damaged and they built another little building there, it had a large Nivea face cream advertising on it. And if you were to visit friends or family in Hamburg, you often would say, meet me by the Nivea Pavilion, because it's just outside the railway station and less busy. This is, of course, a very early view. And you see the trams, they ran in all directions, really, by both sides of the station. And the main railway post office building is to the right here. We can't see it, where the tracks lead. And that nice building there still survives. And it almost became the terminus of the Maglev train they were going to build to go to Berlin. But of course, it was never built. But the building survives today. And even later, this, of course, is a more modern view here of one of our modern trams. And you see a little girl posting a letter here. So this was kept on quite long. Not quite sure when it finished. I can look it up. 50s, early 60s, I think they finished it. But it was used a lot. Hamburg also had, from the early days, some interesting buildings. This one survives today. It's in Ohlsdorf, which is served by the elevated and also the suburban electrics close by to this. The whole area around it has been rebuilt. Of course, the trams are long gone. This was a waiting room, really. It was for the tramway staff having a little break there, and also it had a waiting room for the Hamburg passengers, even with a clock here. It's quite nice that it survives. So we've talked about the various companies, and we've already seen some of the cars they used. And this is a view, a map here drawn by our friend Peter Sohns, who makes maps like this, track maps even for tram and trolleybus systems around the world. And this shows us the extent of the network, the electric tram network in 1916. There is a few lines that were like up here in the northeast. These are dotted. These were planned. I don't think they were built, but they had plans then. You can see Altona on the left here, which was still a separate city then, of course. And the line to Wandsbek is up to the right here, to the northeast or east. And of course, there's also a line already connecting with Harburg via Wilhelmsburg in the south, line 33 down here. And you can also see the little interurban tram that ran here from Altona to Blankenese, which closed in 1921. So we've seen already some of the four-wheelers, or as we would here say, two-axle trams of the SEG, the electric company. There was one other line, which was the Hamburg-Altona Zentralbahn, originally spelled with a C, I think later with a Z, or was it the other way around? Not quite sure. It was only one line, and they had these very strange looking yellow trams, and it was called the Chinese tramway, because if you look at the roof and all the curves there and everything, I think they had very similar trams running in Liverpool, I think. And when the SEG took over this company, once the concession expired, that was the case with most of the lines, the original concession just expired, and the SEG, being the largest company, took over all these other lines, starting in horse car days. So the Hochbahn took these over, but they did not run very long with them, because apparently the quality was not very good. They were rather worn, and I guess this is due to the original company not spending a lot of money on them, knowing that their concession would expire eventually, and of course it did, and then they got taken over. So they saw very little, if any, service with the Hamburger Hochbahn later. But quite interesting looking. I think we have another picture here. It came in different paint schemes. This was just one line really from Hamburg to Altona, connecting these two cities. And here's a picture taken on the famous Reeperbahn, what is the red light district of Hamburg. I would assume even in those days it was already the red light district. It's changed a bit. As I said, in the war, a lot got destroyed. The square is still there, and some of the old buildings survive, but mostly you will see 1950s and 60s replacement buildings there. And it's still the red light district, and it served at the top of the street here, on the left here, which is the elevated and the subway station there, and we also have a suburban electric station underground here. The SEG, as I said, was the largest operator in Hamburg in horse car days, and then of course in electric days. And there is this preserved set. The Hamburger Hochbahn kept it for services, for special services. It's not completely original. I mean, when you look at it and you compare it with actual photos of these early trams, there were a number of types, all very similar, different windows and different technical aspects here and there, but basically they all look like this. But this is a mix of various older trams they still had, and they try to make it look. It looks quite nice. It's preserved today at this museum on the Baltic coast, and I think the motor car has recently been restored to service again. I've seen it operating there. I ran on it, I drove in it, and the trailer I think is next. So this is a Bahrenfeld depot, which for a long time was used as a storage space for all the preserved trams that survived. There are certain types that did not survive, unfortunately. I think some of them were put away and then got destroyed in the world wars, but there are a few, and all of them, luckily, are still accessible today. Some of them you can ride. We will see photos of them later, but this is the oldest one, the oldest set. And as you can see, it was used for all sorts of events. This is on the main City Hall Square here, Rathausmarkt, when trams were still running there. This is some 80-year celebration of some downtown shopkeepers association, I think. I used to run to the zoo, and it was used quite a lot. So the main company involved in operating trams starting in 1920, I think, is the Hamburger Hochbahn-Aktiengesellschaft, abbreviated HHA. This is the company that still exists today and runs the metro, or the U-Bahn as we call it. Most older Hamburg people will still call it the Hochbahn, because that was the name of it. and a large portion of it is actually hoch, which means elevated. So in the old days, I think the majority of the lines were elevated, and then of course later from the 50s they built more subways, more underground sections. And the Hamburger Hochbahn, as you can see from this timetable cover here, even then operated various modes. On top you see the metro, the U-Bahn, the Hochbahn itself. You have buses, they also have the trolleybuses, the trams, and for a very long time they also operated the Alster Lake ferry boats. You could use them with a regular transport ticket, transit ticket. They're still there, but now they cater for tourists and they're much more expensive. And through another subsidiary, the Hochbahn now also operates the harbor ferries in Hamburg. I mean, it's all state-owned now. The Hochbahn, of course, originally was built and founded. You can see it here in 1919. I mean, it was founded much earlier, 1911, I think, with the purpose of building this elevator. They were not going to operate trams, but they took up the offer when the concession of the SEG expired in some of the other companies. They absorbed them all and they operated all the trams. Here we have the Hauptbahnhof again. We see a 2-axle tram in the old livery here. It's a bit not the best picture here, but unfortunately you can see the Adolf's logo was very prominently displayed on the main passenger shed here. And also if you look on the side of the tram, line 16, it ran via Adolf Hitler Platz, which was the city hall square, Rathausmarkt, which in those days had this rather unfortunate name. This is what they looked like after the war. They received this new cream and red livery. Here we have one of the lines at Hellkamp that did not have a loop, so the trams, the motor cars had to run around the trailer. And the buildings here in the background have only disappeared, I think, in the last 8 or 9 years. They were still there. It's not a very busy part of the town. Unlike this one here, behind the tram, you can see a little brick wall, and this is where the elevated or the subway, the metro comes out of the underground, out of the subway and climbs the steep ramp. And yeah, this is probably taken on a Sunday. You don't see anybody about. On the left, the building there, that's the back of the city hall. It's actually the stock exchange. And I'm actually working with this place. You can't see it, it's on the left here. I work in a bank. And I used to look out of the window down into the elevator here. This is a picture here of Harburg, this town in the south, which became part of Hamburg in 1937, and before that was connected to Hamburg by tram. Of course, this is also where the trolleybuses ran here down in Harburg in the 50s. Some replacing tram lines. I think one line was trolleybus only, never had trams on it. And the railway station behind it, that's where the railway takes you to Hamburg. So if you are living in Harburg and you want to go to Hamburg quickly, Hamburg meaning here the city center, then you're probably better off using the railway, which takes you there in 10 minutes. The tram here also goes to Hauptbahnhof. So it'll meet the same train again there you could take from here, but it probably took about 45 minutes, I would say, to get there on the way, serving many housing estates and stuff. It's quite an old picture here, a bit grainy, near Gänsemarkt, Dammtorstraße, showing you what the system looked like after the war. And we see some buildings here, and apparently this street or part of the street was not bombed and survived, but probably all the buildings are gone now, because later they built big and modern ugly buildings there. This one here is labeled for number 5, line 5, but as you can see, so many people in there, and I think this was taken in a depot. This is probably a charter, eine Sonderfahrt, a private hire of the enthusiasts. I think we'll see some of them later, many of them wearing a tie, and hats were still worn, of course, here in the late 50s, I think. And of course, they had a lot of trailers that were not used during the day. A lot of them only came out for the rush hour, and they were parked up in the depots, all carrying different advertising here. So quite a mix of advertising, including the Holstein Pilsner, the local beer, one of the local beers that's still around today. Well, we've seen this spot before, Hellkamp. You can see the tram actually running around the trailer. In the distance, you see the Hochbahn, the elevators, the metro. And on the left, there is a large catalog sales company, one of the largest in Germany. They still operate there today. But as I said, the buildings have recently gone and you wouldn't recognize it. They did start to preserve trams that were about to be retired, sometimes well in advance. And first, they had them all in Bahrenfeld Depot. It's this VVM organization again, to coast, where you can actually ride the Hamburg trams. We'll see photos of them later. Eventually, they had to leave that depot. There were some misunderstandings, and the Hochbahn wanted to get rid of them. And eventually, the depot was closed anyway because the lines serving it disappeared. So they had to find alternative accommodation, and this was in the north of Hamburg, very rural areas. They put them in barns and stuff. But today, of course, it's all accessible in one location. But for many years, the trams were distributed around various little barns of Hamburg mostly. We had a subway, we had a tunnel in Hamburg, which was built in the 30s, I think, not a very long one, and had no station in it. And what you can see that where the cars are, this is actually a motorway. So this comes in from the south of Hamburg. To the left of us is one of the main river bridges. They rebuilt this all to make it a motorway, and the tram got its own little subway here, tunnel section to avoid running on the motorway. And today the bus goes through it. So the tunnel was built big enough for 2 buses passing each other. And if you know which line to ride, you can still do that today, but no sign of the trams anymore. The permanent right-of-way, I mean, this portion of where the track is now, that still survives today as a road exclusively used by buses and emergency services. There used to be accidents, of course, with trams. This is an old view. You can see this is shortly after the war. The lorry, the truck here for Union Transportation Company, I think, has this old registration plate of BH, which means British Hamburg, because before the war we had different car registrations, and when the Allies took over, the car registrations were all changed according to in what zone you lived, and Hamburg was British, so it was BH. And the tram probably got rebuilt afterwards. It's heavily damaged here, but they needed everything then, of course, especially after the war. So they will have rebuilt it. And talking about rebuilding, a lot of these old 2-axle trams got modernized over the years, but they didn't modernize everything. They more or less just put a new front and a new back on it. As you can see on the side, that's pretty much unchanged. And one of the things they did, they had these curved windows. I'm not sure if they were made of plastic, but they had this yellow tint. They put something in there to make it easier for the operator, for the tram driver, give him a bit of shelter from the sun, which probably was more intense than with the old tram, where there was, let's go back to this view here, there was a little less glass there for the sun to reach in. So here we are at the central City Hall Square, Rathausmarkt. You can see the buses have arrived already, but it was still a busy hub, and many lines terminated here, like this one here, line 2, which of course later also was the last line that survived until 1978. But here it was a short term, I think, because it used to continue on south. What you might not have noticed earlier, and we'll have a look at it on one of the next views, is here you see it's probably the conductor with the switch iron to change the points or the switches, as some of you call it. In the old days, it's not on this picture. Here we have another modernized one. And as you can see, the trailer is completely, it was completely kept as it was. It wasn't modernized at all. So they really just modernized the front here to make it look nicer. This one actually ended up in America. It's at the Seashore Trolleybus Museum. And some problem here, either no power or a problem with the tram, so they're pushing it back into the barn. I guess I've seen it there. Unfortunately, it doesn't look very good. All the European trams, and they have quite a number at Seashore in Kennebunkport, Maine, are in quite a bad state. I mean, you have the salt sea air, so everything is rusting, paint is peeling, especially inside, wood is getting wet. But at least it survives. There is another car of this type preserved on the museum in near Kiel, in the Baltic coast. Yeah, another one of those modernized sets. Hamburg, or the Hochbahn, modernized pretty early. So if you visit Hamburg in the 60s and 70s, you wouldn't see any of these trams. They all went, I think, in the early to the latest to the mid 60s, and they were all replaced by the large 4-axle trams, the 8-wheelers, which we will see later, the famous ones. You saw that in the intro page earlier, one of the V6 types. These all disappeared, and luckily some of them got preserved. They also had modernization ideas, and then built a very small batch of new trams with a slightly different body. Not many were built of this type, often by other companies, because Hamburg had its own tram car factory. We'll see a picture of it later. They also tried some lightweight trailers here. Also, again, just a very small number. I think this ran in Harburg, line 33. Not downtown. I think they had problems with them. They were too light, I guess. And then they also went for articulation. And we'll look at the motor car soon. This is a picture here primarily of one of these trailers were built specially to run behind these articulated VG-type trams. The VG-type trams also pulled regular 4-axle trams for a while, but these were built for them. 29, they had 30 motor cars and 29 trailers. But they were not a success. They were rather small. And of course, one big problem occurred later, which was they got rid of the conductors. They one-manned the trams, one-person operation, and such a little trailer here with a conductor was just too expensive for them. Here's another picture taken down south in Harburg with 2 of those lightweight trailers that were not a success. And one of the early 4-axle trams, V2 type, I think, not modernized. They also had trailers for them. And as you can see, when you look at the motor car here, that has already been converted because there is no door here on the left, on the offside, but the trailer is completely as built. Astra Bear, that's the other Bear. We have Holsten and we have Astra, and those survive today. Trolley poles, of course. Hamburg was the last system in Germany to operate with trolley poles. Koblenz was the other one that closed in the early 60s, I think. Hamburg held on to this. This is a Sonderfahrt, a charter, a private hire here. On the right, you see a subway station, a metro station, and this was a triangle here, a Y. They could go into here and then turn round. And this is probably the car that was preserved. I haven't checked the number, but I guess it was owned by the VVM already in those days. And they did tours with it, of course. Now we are back to this Hellbruck terminus we saw earlier. Now we have a V2 here, a larger tram. Originally we had the 2-axle trams with trailers coming up here. And here we have the large one. They got rebuilt. Again, just putting a new front on them, a front end. The side is not much changed. And again, with the yellow tinted front glass, or the window. Line 19 was the last line that did not have a loop. And so for a long time, they used a very small number they rebuilt specifically for it, which remained double-ended. A lot of the others were made single-ended. But here for the 19, they needed them. Later, they put a Y in so they could turn around in the triangle and use the modern trams. But line 19 was the last line where you could see some older rolling stock. But they used to run everywhere here. There's line 5. With some of the typical equipment here, these shelters are were quite well known in Hamburg. If you take the roof off and you look at it from the top, it looks like a big W. So it's accessible from both sides, and it offers shelter from wind and rain, depending on from where the rain and the wind comes from. But we had a lot of them. I think they're all gone. This is our main shopping street, the Mönckebergstraße, and as you can see, this tram here has been modernized, and it's approaching the Rathausmarkt, the City Hall Square. Quite a busy street today. You only have buses and taxis on it. All the private cars have been driven out. They have to use little side roads now. But the bus traffic was so heavy for many years that some of the bus lines actually were taken out of the street because people had difficulties crossing the road, because once the trams went and many more bus lines appeared, this is the main artery with heaviest traffic. Here's one of the trams that was partly modernized to a different design with one of these specially built trailers, which are technically quite old, but they look a bit more modern, a little more streamlined. And what I wanted to talk about earlier is here on the front, I was talking about the conductor at the City Hall Square using the switch iron, the points iron to change the points, the switches. But Hamburg was well known for having this on the front, or really on the side, and the operator would just open the window, slide the window sideways mostly, and then just lean out. So like in Berlin, they didn't have to leave the tram, unless, of course, the tram got rebuilt. And we've seen pictures of these modern round front ends, and they do not have this feature anymore because you couldn't slide the windows open. So there the conductor had to rush out and change the points. But in the old days, the driver could do that, and just the motorman, and just doing it from his where he was working from, the front of the car platform. This is an Altona here, completely changed. One of the preserved 4-axle trailers in the original livery, the pre-war livery. This is again, of course, a Sonderfahrt, a private hire, a charter, taken by the transport enthusiasts, probably of the VVM club that runs this tram museum by the Baltic coast now, by the Baltic Sea. And it's crossing the old southern Elbe. The Elbe is the river here, the main river. And it's divided. There's the northern portion of it and the southern portion. This is the old southern portion of the river with this nice bridge that survives. No traffic on it anymore, only pedestrians and cyclists. It's quite old. But quite unusual, of course, this combination. They did not usually operate in service like this, of course. This is just for enthusiasts. And here you see the first picture of this museum I've been talking about so much, the VVM Museum at Schönberger Strand. It's about a 45-minute bus ride from Kiel on the Baltic coast. On the right, you see a railway station. There will be a railway line operating there again soon, which will actually be a tram train into Kiel. But the museum will survive, and they will also run museum railway trains. They used to have steam. I don't think the steam locomotives run at the moment. But of course, it's the only place in Germany where you can actually, well, not the only, but the main location in Germany where you can actually enjoy riding a Hamburg tram. And here we see one of the few V3 types, successor of the V2. Not many of them were built. Of course, they tried out the concepts of making them bigger, longer, more people, and then eventually, of course, they also one-manned them. On the right is a Kiel tram, and if you look at the track work here, you can see that this is the place where they have two types of track gauges. There's the standard gauge, of course, Hamburg, and Kiel on the right here, which is 1,100 millimeters. And portions of the track are dual gauge, and not quite all of it, but most of it. So you can have a tram from Hamburg and a tram from Kiel on the same track, more or less, behind each other. This one here is the V4 type. Only 3 of them were built, and I think they also started building a trailer, but then the war broke out and they all got destroyed. The trailer was never built, and the 3 trams that came to Hamburg, they all got bombed and they were not rebuilt. They are the Hamburg equivalent of the famous Dresdner Hecht, this rather streamlined, large and for the 1930s quite modern, with automatic doors and stuff like that, and even had 2 trolley poles here for both directions, so they had to didn't have to turn it around. Unfortunately, none survived, and too much damage to rebuild them. They didn't bother. But we've already seen in the museum a V3 type, the V4 just now, the black and white one that they got destroyed, the 3. The Hamburger Hochbahn then introduced even longer trams, the V5 type. And they already look a bit like what we had later, the modern V6 and V7 types. They had matching trailers for these, but this was a rather small batch, and they more or less, they tried out what they could do with making them longer, transporting more passengers. And this is taken in one of the depots where also later some in Kronskamp, where some of the museum fleet was stored. That's the trailer here, and you can see Old Faithful on the left, 656, this museum tram, which is not 100% authentic, but it's quite nice. And this one is also preserved. Here's a view of the busy City Hall Square, Rathausmarkt, lots of people there, many lines terminated there. You can see the switch iron here. Some had them on the front, but most had them on the side here where they could open the window. And luckily, I have one of those here in the living room. And I recently got one from Berlin as well, which is a little shorter, so the Hamburg ones are longer. Here we have a view of line 14 and this strange contraption here on the left, to the right of the lady. And you can also see this man approaching here wearing a uniform. This is a customs point because line 14 used to go into the Hamburg Free Harbor. And the Free Harbor, of course, was a customs or duty-free area for goods that came in by ships. So you could go in there, and if you came out again, often you were checked. They looked at your luggage, or if you did it in a car, you had to open the boot, the trunk, to look inside if you were getting anything out of the harbor and hadn't paid the import duty that was needed, because there is no duty. The harbor now is much smaller, the Free Harbor, and it's moved also. It meant that you could, as an importer, you could import goods from other countries and then send them out again to another country, just sell them on without having to pay import duty in Hamburg or in Germany. I think this is a customs officer here. Looks like he spotted the photographer, or he's talking to his friend, which we can't see. I don't know. The most southern line, I think, for many years, Rönneburg and Harburg. Again, this was a triangle, a Y, never received a loop. One of the V5 sets here. And this one is on the way to Rönneburg in Wilhelmsburg, so another town that in 1937 got merged into Hamburg. Many of these buildings survive. It's not so much visible here, but a lot of them are this red brick Northern German Gothic style, and larger too. This is the main road in Drag. Okay, so this is number one. Let me show you part one, and now we go to part number two. I'm not sure, is this the same view or is it smaller now?
Sehr gut zu sehen.
It's good to see, because when I look at it, I got this screen share thing. For me, it's full screen. I think you probably have it a little smaller. It can't be helped.
No, it looks full screen, thank you.
It's full screen now. Okay, maybe it works.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. So here we look inside the Falkenried tramway workshops that used to build trams for Hamburg and also for export. They delivered trams to southern Latin America. But it's the Hamburg builder, the local builder, one of the local builders, the only one that survived in the end. And here is one of these articulated trams being constructed. It's technically 2 rooms and a bath, like so many other systems had, and it was terrible on the track. Very, very rough riding, but you can see an amazing amount of different types here. On the right, you have lots of 2-axle trailers. Behind this articulated tram, which is still in half here, the articulation is missing in the middle. There's one of these rebuilt V3s, where they put a new front end on, and on the left you have more modern trams, the V6, and maybe also a V7. They look very similar. So the Hamburg used to produce its own tram, and the company still survives today, and it does the maintenance for the buses of the whole CHHA. Here we see one of these articulated trams on one of the Ulster canals crossing one of these bridges here. We have many bridges in Hamburg. This is on a special here. Also got some color views of it at the railway station. I wish I had one of those signs here. There is a little enamel sign here on the front, and Hamburg trams didn't use them very much. They usually put them on when they were doing some short workings, so not running the full length of the line. But otherwise, there is very little available in signs. Some of you might know I do collect destination signs. I do have some of these line numbers, the route numbers that were in the window here, but everything else here is a roll sign, is a blind, and Hamburg introduced them quite early on. So unlike many other systems in Germany and around the world, signs, destination signs, originally wooden, of course, metal later, they disappeared quite early. Another view of those, one of those VG types. V stands for four-axle, vier auf Deutsch, and G, Gelenk, articulation. And you see the, when I said it's the 2 rooms and a bath, the bath here is the little thing in the middle, levitating between the two. But they were not liked. And actually here on the right, we see a little bit of it. That's one of the 4-axle trailers, not one of these little. It's not of the 2-axle trailers. But they were not liked by the staff, and they were not liked by the passengers because they were rather uncomfortable to ride. This location has changed completely. There is a big street here now with buses. Right behind the tram is the railway line to Lübeck, not electrified in those days. It's 2 tracks, and the 2 tracks right behind that, you can see there's a 3rd rail there. That's the electric S-Bahn. And then even further, a little further up, is the original subway station, the Hochbahn station, U-Bahn, Berliner Tor. It was later rebuilt, and it's now further to the left and underground. But this was the place. There were bridges here, pedestrian bridges and street bridges, where you could stand, and you could, if you were lucky, you could catch 4 types of different transit modes, transportation modes: metro, S-Bahn, electric, railway, and trams. There might have been a street on the right. I don't know if they had buses on it, but now it's buses, and the rest is really very difficult to see now. There is fences and trees and hedges and stuff. But the railway line has been electrified since, and the S-Bahn, the U-Bahn, still run, of course. On certain occasions, they put the flags on the front. Not quite sure what the event was here. This is passing the main railway station, and you can see the Nazi logo is long gone. That used to be up there somewhere, visible from very far away. Otherwise, not much change really, except the color is different of the tram. And here we have one at the main City Hall Square again, with this nice sign here, and it actually tells you that it's connecting with bus line 56, which is heading to Eidelstedt. So if you take this tram all the way to Hagenbeek's Tierpark, which is our famous zoo, which is still there, then you have the bus 56, and it takes you to Eidelstedt. But you could also, of course, take a tram to Eidelstedt, which would have gone there a different way. This is the end of the VG, I mean the rear view of this tram. And of course, with the trolley pole, you need this trolley catcher in case it snaps off the wire, so it doesn't go all the way up, because there is, of course, here a mechanism there that keeps it up. This arrests it, and then you just pull it down again. I think this is more or less the picture we saw earlier with the, you might remember the construction of the elevated, only we were standing on the other side, I mean, at the end of the street here, straight on. looking this way, more or less. But you can see here a VG type articulated tram, and then the old subway cars, the old Hochbahn cars, quite a mix of types, modernization, some rebuilt, some newly built, but all rather small, not longer than a little tram car really. And like Berlin, we have this narrow profile on the elevated. Berlin has both. They have large profile and narrow profile, but the original line in Berlin also was narrow profile. So the tunnels also are smaller, and you couldn't run bigger, wider metro cars on it. Then we had the PCC, and there was only one. Hamburg was experimenting in those days. In the end, they went for the tram right behind it. The V6 and V7s, we'll look at them later. But they did buy one. This was built by the Bourgeois Nivelle for Brussels, BN today, or Bombardier, now Alstom, of course. And they built it for Brussels, but they never delivered it there. It was shipped directly to Hamburg. And Hamburg tried it out. It could only run on this line here, line 8, because it's a bit wider, especially in curves. There were problems meeting a car going the other way. And this, of course, is a private hire, a special photo stop they're doing. And you can also see this is quite early in the 50s. They were extending those, what we call them social housing projects, but social housing in a way that most of Hamburg people actually lived in this type of housing estates. It's all red brick, Northern German, Gothic style. But here it's still under construction. There was a little more damage, but I think this is all an extension of what was there. And of course, all the buildings that got damaged in the war, they rebuilt them more or less to the original look. I mean, a lot of them were burned out after the phosphorus bombs they dropped on us. So this tram operated in Hamburg for a while, and then they decided, as it can't go anywhere else on the system because it was too wide, they really didn't need it. So Copenhagen was going to buy new trams, and they got this on loan, and it operated in Copenhagen with trolley pole and in the Hamburg colors, in the Hamburg cream and red livery for a while in Copenhagen. But Copenhagen also had a tram, a GT6, a Duvac GT6 articulated 6-axle tram from Düsseldorf on test. And in the end, they decided that the GT6 is bigger, takes more people. So they didn't want the PCC anymore, and it got shipped back to Brussels, where it was originally supposed to go. And for many years, it ran in Brussels, but of course, repainted into Brussels colors and stuff. And here it is. I went to the farewell party, the big farewell tour. They put a Hamburg blind in here, which somebody had saved, and they repainted it into Hamburg colors. You can see the Brussels colors on an identical car behind. And they ran it over much of the system in Brussels for all day. It was quite nice, very busy. They needed, I think, 2 or 3 trams because there wasn't enough space for everybody to ride on the Hamburg tram. And I remember they only managed to put the Hamburger Hochbahn logo on one side. Maybe they only had one. Oops. As you can see here, they put the number, but they didn't have another transfer to put it on the other side. This is in Brussels, again on the same day with a Hamburg sign. And I'm not sure if it ever ran on the line 3, but at least it was on the original Hamburg blind roll sign. And this spot here, of course, was built for the big exhibition in Brussels, and they used to have vicinal interurban trams running here in those days, meter gauge. But later it got converted to standard gauge, and the Brussels city trams serve this. And here it's at the Woluwe Museum, where the big tram museum is now, and now it shows you line 8 to Straßburger Platz. And this is the line it ran on from Straßburger Platz, or Den Heide, actually, to the Farmsen race course, which is also gone now, and that's the only line it could operate. And then it came back to Germany for a while, to the museum on the Baltic coast, but being a very fast car, and it has a pantograph, eventually in Brussels, they put pantographs on everything. It ended up in the museum in Denmark. And as you can see here, it has the line 7, which is a Copenhagen number, route number, line number. And it also has a Copenhagen destination sign in the front here. So this is the way it operated in Copenhagen. But of course, then it had a trolley pole, and it still has a pantograph today. I've operated it there. It's very fast. It's quite nice. This is the outer end in the north, and you can go quite fast on it. But you have to be careful. Oops. Now we're going to have another look at the network. We saw earlier the network in 1916, and here we are in the 1950s. And many of the lines have disappeared, but well, some of the lines have disappeared. Many are still here. Hamburg, of course, used to be the second largest network in Germany after Berlin. The heyday was in the 1920s, 30s, when they had these trams running with the Großer Burstar every 20 seconds or so. But here it's much reduced, but you can see the tram lines in the south of the city for the first time in Harburg here, 33, 34, and 38. And some of them soon after this got converted to trolleybus. Not many Ys left, triangles. You have the 33. We've seen that earlier down here. And up here I can't see because I got the videos of you here. Used to be one here. The U-Bahn is shown, the metro in blue. You can see that. So still a large number of lines, but not as many as there used to be, and some are still closed. They are marked by an X here because we are at the end of 1950, and these got war damaged here in the east, and some up here, but they got reinstated later. Another view of Falkenried. Yeah, everything old is gone. They've now exclusively switched to producing the new V6 types, and they built 109 of them and 126 trailers. So they were quite busy. Not all of them were built in Hamburg. Some were built by Linke Hoffmann Busch. Here's a front view again with the very long switch iron here. Quite a nice view. Up here, this is a loudspeaker, so the driver could make announcements to passengers on the platform. Don't know when he used to do that, but it was there. This is what they looked like in color. And of course, we used to have trams going all the way to the airport, right outside the terminal. And when they closed the line for many years, one had to take a bus, later a special bus at a higher price. But eventually they built an S-Bahn there, and that's quite busy now. This is how they looked originally. You can see that they changed lots of things over the time. They put this thing on the front, the little square with a line or route number. Originally, they didn't have that. It was here in the right-hand window. They also later changed some of the window arrangements, and of course we will see that when we look at the side with the doors in a minute, that they modernized them for one-man operation, one-person operation. Here is a view of old and new. This is here in Wandsbek depot, which is still a bus depot today. All carrying advertising, of course. That was always very strong on Hamburg trams, featured very strong. We looked at the nice old bridge of the southern bridge of the Elbe River earlier with the unusual match of modern tram and old trailer. This is the northern bridge, much bigger. Unfortunately, destroyed in the war. There used to be a very, very large brick gate there with eagles on top and everything. It's unfortunately they demolished it, probably to make way for the motorway here. And you can see how it works, the trams, and now the buses here run in the middle, and the motorway traffic is on either side of it. We also had in Harburg a railroad crossing, and it crossed an electric railway line. So this is why all this equipment is up here, to prevent the connection from the tram overhead to the much higher electric railway overhead. And I think the trams, they coasted through, if I remember correctly. And I think that was the only place in Hamburg we had very much sought after by enthusiasts. And that's why we have the picture here, because the photographer went there specially to look at it. Later, they closed the crossing, so the trains don't interfere with it. We're back on the famous Reeperbahn, the red light district. And as you can see, much more ugly buildings now compared to this very early postcard view we had at the beginning. I was talking about modernization, and the Hochbahn did eventually modernize these trams. All the old ones had gone by then, and they introduced one-man operation. So they got rid of the conductor in the motor car, and they redesigned the seat and the little cabin the driver was sitting in. So now he could swivel around and he opened the doors, and there was a little flap. He would rise, and then he could sell tickets from the ticket machine, British made. And then when he was finished with that, he would just close the little lid to the passenger compartment, and swivel around, ring the bell, and off he went. And to indicate to the passengers in Hamburg that this was a one-man tram, they introduced this white stripe. You see where the front light is, around it, and to the left and to the right. You don't see it on the earlier trams. We'll go back just briefly here. See, they were all red, no stripe there. And then later they introduced this. When they still had the trailers, they did not convert those. They would have been too expensive. So the trailers remained in service for a few years with conductors. And when they got rid of the conductors, they couldn't use these trailers anymore because they didn't have automatic doors. And they decided, we just scrap all the trailers, we kick out all the conductors that were still serving on the trailers. And on some of the lines, it meant that, of course, the capacity transporting passengers was halved in most cases where they had motor and trailer. So on certain routes and certain times of the day, they ran more frequent with the motor cars because they were much smaller, of course, I mean, capacity-wise. Here we have a picture of one of these modernized trams, one-manned trams with the old Altona railway station in the background. Altona, of course, originally was a separate town. Many moons ago was Danish, and they had their own railway station. The Danish State Railway had their own railway station further to the left here, which still survives as City Hall today. But then later they built this one. It was a stop terminus, a dead-end terminus. And unfortunately, when they built the S-Bahn subway, the electric suburban line under it, they said this wasn't suitable, and they demolished the whole thing. So there's a very ugly concrete building there now, still used as a railway station, but even that will close because Deutsche Bahn has decided to move Altona station onto the main line heading up north to Kiel, Flensburg, Kiel. The S-Bahn is still there. It's a big bus terminus, but no more trams, of course, and no more brick nice looking railway station. Buses arrived in Hamburg quite late. I've seen line diagrams, route maps from the 50s with very few bus lines operated by the Hochbahn then, but often you could change at the end of a tram line to buses that took you further out. Here is Billstedt Loop, and you have buses waiting there to take the passengers further out. And you can still see where I think maybe that's where the post box used to be. They paneled it all, taken it away. The depots, the tram depots, Hamburg had quite a few of them. Slowly, I mean, as they closed tram lines, a lot of them were converted to bus operation. I think this one was still tram. The buses here, they have a Fahrschule sign in the back. So I guess the training school was here because the tram training school was also here in this depot in Kronskamp. And funnily enough, there is still a tram here today. The building on the left has been rebuilt. It's a big supermarket car park now, double deck, and they have one of these trams on display inside, more or less at its old location. We have seen trams running in the middle of the street. We also had reservations like this side of the road, often single track or sometimes single track with passing loops. And of course, this was done to keep the trams off the street, which was quite busy there, and there wasn't enough space to double track all of it. They would have had to demolish houses and stuff. And here's one of these typical Hamburg social housing brick buildings. We got hundreds and hundreds of them everywhere, and they all look very similar. They were started in the 1920s, and then after the war, those burned out ones were rebuilt in the same style. So we have them from the 1920s to the 50s more. But there are some older buildings surviving here. This is south of the river, going to Harburg again. It also crossed some bridges. This used to be a swing bridge. I'm not sure if it was still in service then. I think this one is still there, but of course it hasn't been used for a long time. I think we used to have two on the line, and further on is the railroad crossing with the electric line. This is a nice view here of various museum trams that have been preserved. I think most of them, I guess. I haven't checked the numbers. At least these types survive. So for a while you had the new trams, which later you only had those. And here some of the older ones survive. Some got scrapped, of course, but they kept some of these types for museum purposes. So another view of the City Hall Square, different direction here, different angle, always very busy, now served by buses. One of the famous shopping arcades here, malls, what you see in Torino, they have a lot like these. We only have two, they survive. Mönckebergstraße, our main shopping street again. Even then, very busy. And now it's only bus and taxi. Various loops were available for short turns, but later when the network shrunk, they also were served regularly. This is by the airport. We've passed the terminal building, but as you can see here, the airport is close by. And in case of low-flying aircraft, they have painted the poles in a color so the pilots can spot them. I don't think they ever flew that low, but I think it was mandatory if you had anything over a certain height near the airport. It had to be painted in this danger, these danger markings. Mönckebergstraße again, and here we see the big city hall. We've seen lots of pictures taken outside City Hall Square, Rathausmarkt, but this is the new Rathaus. It looks old, but it's actually the new one, and it's very big. I think it has 800 rooms I've seen recently inside. So that's where the Hamburg Senate. Hamburg is a city-state. We have our own parliament, and they operate out of that location. The trams always here and there connected with other modes. Here we have the S-Bahn, one of the old electric trains built in the 30s that lasted very long. It still had a first class middle or center coach. Here we still have a trailer in use. I think he's braking. You can see a lot of dust here, sand, brake dust. This is again in Harburg, south of the river. So I said earlier, there is the V6 type. They built 109 of them, plus 126 trailers. Not quite sure why they had more trailers. Maybe they were all supposed to go behind these articulated trams. And then later they had the V7 type, which looked very, very similar, slightly different window arrangement. And the V7s are lightweight. They were built with an aluminum body. They didn't last as long because they were lightweight and they were not as good. I mean, they didn't last as long. But the V7s, there was 109 of them, and again, 126 trailers. So we had both series had 109 trams, motor cars, and 126 trailers. And the V7s were originally delivered with this type of folding door. This is a V6 here. No, this is a V7. They look very similar. The windows are different. The V6s have another window here and there. That tells them apart, but one has to know. Oops. Yes, there it is. Here, this is a V6. You see the extra window here. Oh yes, there. At the end and the front, they have this extra window. So originally, there was a window here. And when they one-manned them, they widened the door. It was a single door before, and then they widened it. And at the end, I think they actually reversed it. There used to be double doors there, and then they made them single-ended, single leaf. Or well, here it's folding. The V6s were delivered with other doors. This is again at the Hauptbahnhof. You see it on the right. And here they are building the S-Bahn, and the tram got moved around a bit. The traffic has already been moved to this temporary bridge on the left. And I think later the trams were also had to be moved because they were building stuff there for the S-Bahn. And eventually it also meant the end of line 2 going this far, and they terminated at the City Hall Square because they simply couldn't pass this anymore because of the works. Here we have one of the advertising trams. I think Hanover was the first system in Germany that started this. We call it Pop-Werbung because it was very modern. 1970s, they started very bright colors and graphics and stuff. And Hamburg had quite a number of these. And here we see it passing under the second generation of S-Bahn trains, but looking a bit different. Here we have that nice bridge again. We saw that earlier. Oops, sorry. And one last view, I think, of Altona. So there was a line terminating here, line 1, and then you can see some buses. And today on the left is full of buses. And on the right, you have this big, ugly concrete building, which is really, it's a shopping mall that also has some train tracks. It's still a stop terminus, of course. Here's another one of those advertising trams, again at the Central Railway Station, which is behind the photographer. We have some restaurants here and some hotels, and there is also a theater there. And it's the start of the second red light district we have beyond in the side roads. You have St. Georg, which is still a red light district today. And another one, Coral, I didn't put all the different ones in. We probably had about 20, some with trailers, some without, and all rather colorful, mostly. This building here of the railway station was later demolished, and they put a big glass and steel office building there. And I've heard that they're going to pull it down again and rebuild this, because the railway station has this on both sides here on the left, which we can't see, and it used to have one here. And what they're going to do is they are going to cover the road here. So they're going to extend the passenger shed, and there will be, I don't know, probably buses still going through somehow, but there will be access down to the platforms. There is already access to the railway platforms on the left now, but they want to make it wider with lifts and stuff. So it's going to change. Yeah, this is the tidal view without any text on it. Shows you very nicely what the V6s looked like, our main type of tram. Here you see it by the harbor front with a DT2 subway car, metro car on the viaduct, which that still runs, of course, today. I'm looking at the clock here. We're getting close to 2 hours. Another view of this nice bridge, Southern Bridge. Gives you the date when it was built, 18, can't read it, 80 something to 99, quite old. This is how all the trailers ended up when they were not used anymore. After they got rid of the conductors and they one-manned the service, they got cut up here, and parts of it were just put in a landfill, unfortunately. And this then later happened to the trams. Closed line after line, and of course they made the decision in the 1950s to close the network. Strangely enough, they built 2 new lines, which operated for 10 or a few more years, and then were closed. But they had already made the decision to abandon the tram network, and that's why they didn't modernize the trailers and had to scrap them, because you couldn't one-man them. Well, they couldn't operate them with one person, because they didn't have automatic doors. And a lot of these were scrapped. Some of them saw a second life. This one was here for a very long time. It's an imbiss. It's a little snack bar where they served French fries and currywurst, or famous sausage, bratwurst. Eventually, of course, sitting out here for many years. It got very rusty, and none of them survive now. Somebody bought a couple of them and wanted to put these out as snack bars all around the place, but I think this was the only one as a snack bar. I said earlier that Linke Hoffmann, later Linke Hoffmann Busch in Salzgitter, also built some of the Hamburg trams, and this is why one of them is in their company museum. It's not open to the public. I was lucky, it was my client, and I visited them on business, and I said, can we have a look at your little company museum? And of course they gladly showed me. They have a Hamburg tram, they have a Berlin tram, there is S-Bahn car, I think, some railway equipment. It was Linke Hoffmann, LH or LHB later, built a lot of rail vehicles. And one of them made it to San Francisco. There's another one in Kingston in New York. And this one operated on the F line in San Francisco, here in the Castro. I've been there 5 times now, I think. I've never saw it run. It has a problem. America has this ADA regulation, Americans with Disabilities Act, which means that all the vehicles used have to be accessible. For instance, by wheelchair users or with buggies and stuff. And these doors are just too small. You would have to alter the layout so much and put other doors in that Muni never wanted to do this. This one is not in the correct livery here. What is correct is the DIN, D-I-N, the German industry norm lettering. Of course, the Germans have an industry norm for everything, and there's also one for a typeface, for a font. And this is the DIN narrow, I think. And this is original, but the color is too dark. And then they tried it again later, and the red is almost correct, but they put different font up here, which I think is what the Hochbahn maybe used originally, but they later changed to the DIN font typeface. But I think this is also here at Castro. So I've seen it in various places in storage in San Francisco, but unfortunately I could never ride it. And I was talking about one of the trams on display in this old depot earlier. This is not it. This is another one. And it also used to be a tram depot. And you see the concrete roof, the beams here that used to be the beams holding up the original roof. They've only kept 3 or 4 of them, rows of them, and the rest of the building is completely new. So they put the tram in there that's probably operated out of this location at one stage, and then build a DIY store like Home Depot around it. And it's very rare to get a good picture of it because they always put this kind of crap in front of it because they want to sell you stuff. And here luckily it's only the one thing. I've been there once and I just moved it out of the way, and then within a minute somebody comes and tells you off, don't do that. But there's an escalator going up here, so you can take a picture from the rear as well. So we have 2 trams on display in Hamburg. This is the museum at Schönberger Strand, the VVM tram line on the Baltic coast. And originally they didn't have wires up, and they were pulling a little trailer here with batteries on it. And I think this was the first ride with trams on this very small piece of track they have. It's like a figure 8, and as you can see, it's in 2 gauges, 1,100 millimeters and 1,435 millimeters, which Hamburg is. And this is the tram that was in Hamburg for a while in an old railway depot, and the depot burned down. Luckily, the tram survived, and it was owned by a Hamburg museum, and they have donated it to this museum in Denmark. You remember the PCC is in Denmark, 3060, ex-Brussels, built for Brussels but delivered to Hamburg. And this one is here. I've operated both of them. They're quite nice, and I can only encourage you to visit it. It's probably the best tram museum in Europe, I would say. Crouch in England is quite nice, but this one I think is even nicer. There's more variety of trams operating twice a year. They run everything that can run. So sometimes 40 trams operate. They got a lot of Copenhagen stuff and other Scandinavian trams, some from Germany. And they have this, and they have a Hamburg trailer also, one of these trams. This is where the tram was before. And yeah, I think this was after the fire. You can see the damage on the roof, and further on this one, the steam locomotive was inside, I think, and had the burning roof falling on it. And the tram escaped, and there's also a little salt car from Hamburg tram system, which is also in Denmark. They both survived, and they're both in the museum in Hamburg. So 5 minutes left, then we are over 2 hours. Hamburg also had lots of works cars. Most of them were rebuilt from passenger stock. This is at Falkenried. It's the tram manufacturer. Some of them later got modernized. Hamburger Hochbahn always modernized stuff. We also had advertising cars running around. So here's another beer. This is the St. Pauli brewery beer. And here's one old tram here, which was not used in service, passenger service anymore, with open platforms. So there was probably a shunter in one of the depots. This is an old horse tram, which got converted to a salt car. And this is why it survived. There's 2 or 3 that survived, I think. And after the war, with all the war damage, the Hochbahn was also used for rebuilding parts of Hamburg. There were also narrow gauge steam trains taking away the bricks of the rubble of the bombed houses and stuff. But the Hochbahn also had various types of trams for transporting debris and bricks, and they were also used, of course, for getting the tram network back into operation. And this is just one page out of the catalog. The Hamburger Hochbahn always had little overviews here for all the fleet, all the rolling stock they had, also listing the fleet numbers. Whenever they rebuilt something, they also changed the fleet number. So the whole history is very complicated, especially the early history. And this is just one type of the work car, the non-revenue fleet. And here we have a regular passenger car, no longer used by passengers, I think, pulling one of those salt trailers, ex-horse tram. Hamburg also had a couple of purpose-built rail grinders and track cleaning works cars, all looking very similar. But I think it's the standard Schörling type. Schörling was a company in Germany, still around, that built rail grinders for most German systems, and they also exported them. And they're all based on this. Some were built by it, some were built by the companies, but using the same body design. And a few of them survived in a museum near Hanover, but most got scrapped because they were sitting outside for so long. There's not much you can do with them. But one of them was recently acquired by a private collector. He plans to restore it. I'm not quite sure which one, but could be this one or a similar one. They were quite big, quite big, quite heavy, I would say. Yeah, the depots, this is where we saw the training fleet earlier, slowly got converted. There were still trams in the right-hand portion. This is where the supermarket is now, the parking garage with a tram in it. This one here was a tram depot before. Later it became a bus depot, and then it became a supermarket, and it's still a supermarket today. It's the same location here on the left. You can see there is no tracks, but the building is the same, but it was converted for buses. They had a back entrance. They could go in and out. They didn't have to turn around, but the tram portion survived on the right. And this is the other V6 car that was built, and it was purpose-built as a training car. And as you can see, this is also the original configuration with a single door at the front here. And it's not folding doors. It's, I think they flap open, I think. Oops. Here we see some of these enthusiasts with those cars that survived, wearing a tie, of course, in those days. Quite formal. All this is at Schönberger Strand now. Also this one, this is at Schönberger Strand, the Kiel tram. I think this is an ex-Lübeck tram. And this is a little workshop the Hochbahn had, probably built on a very old 2-axle passenger car. Truck. A couple of unusual vehicles. Hochbahn had some of these. This is a kind of a tractor, so they could switch or push trams around in the central workshops at the Falkenried factory. And they had a couple of these. This is actually taken at the museum, and the tram behind it is not authentic. It's supposed to look like a Hamburg horse car. But the body is new, and the truck, I think, came from Munich, from the Munich trams. But every now and then it runs. Of course, the driver stands there in the open, no shelter. It was just a switcher for the workshop. And of course, and this is the only picture I'm going to show you, the Hamburger Hochbahn had a large fleet of rubber-tired works cars, LKW, as we call them, trucks, lorries. It's one of the war-damaged depots here in Horn behind it, where the depot building actually got destroyed, but the Hochbahn kept it open, and everything was parked except for 1 or 2 tracks that survived in the open. It didn't last long after this picture here. And now we come to the end. 1978 was the last year trams ran, and we were down to one line, number 2, from Schnelsen to Rathausmarkt or Rathaus City Hall. And what you see here in red is, for a while in 1978, it still continued beyond the railway station to the central omnibus station, the central bus station. But then the works of the S-Bahn, we saw a picture of the tram there, and eventually they couldn't pass it anymore, and then they just terminated them here. Originally, the line 2 went all the way down here to Rönneburg south. But the line numbers, the route numbers in Hamburg were changed over the years quite frequently. So the line 2 we had in 1978 is very likely not the same line 2 we had, let's say, in 1916, 1930s. They changed a lot of it. This is just one picture from the last day in 1978. Half of Hamburg attended it. And there was one official last day where there were regular services. This is one of these horse car trailers or horse cars that was later converted to a salt car and then made look authentic here. I mean, they painted it, put some seats inside. It's preserved in a museum in Hanover, here near Hanover today. And people stormed it, and it was such a big success. On the next day, after official services had stopped, the Bild Zeitung, which is one that used to be the main newspaper here, rented a lot of cars from the Hochbahn, put their logo on a sticker on the front and the sides of the trams, and ran them for one more day, so for free. So everybody that missed the official last day still had the chance to go on the line one more time. So I think it was on a weekend. I think this might be from the very last day that was sponsored by this newspaper. And after that, from 1st of October 1978, all the tram stops on line 2 that could not be reached by a bus, because Hamburg had a lot of its own right-of-way in the middle of big streets, with where the buses couldn't run. They ran on the normal portion of the road. They put up these notices that this stop of line 2 will no longer be served, and it says, please use the buses of line 102, which was either very close to this stop or on the other side of the road. And this concludes my presentation. We are 2 hours and 5 minutes something. So I hope I didn't do too bad. I don't know how many viewers we still have, Roberto. What does it look like?
Oh, we still are 40 of us.
Not bad, not bad.
No.
Yeah, so I hope you found this interesting. It was more like a slideshow, and I talked about the pictures we saw. Maybe one day we can do another show where we look at the actual fleet, the numbers, and have pictures, or we maybe do something else. I thought it would be probably more interesting for you just to get an overview of the diverse fleet and scenery and the sad decline of the Hochbahn. Of course, they closed line after line, starting in the 60s to the very last end, where only just one line was left, unfortunately. And I don't see them ever coming back. The politicians are heavily against it. Oh yeah, Stefan has a nice model here of a V7.
V7?
Lars, listen, this is Andrew, all the way from New Jersey. I've been to Hamburg once, and yeah. I have a picture of what looks like an abandoned U-Bahn station. I think it was Hauptbahnhof Nord.
Well, yeah, yes, Hamburg planned ahead. When they build new lines, like the then U2 at Hauptbahnhof Nord, the northern, I mean, there are a couple of stations of the metro at the central railway station. They build new tunnels for this new line going under the Ulster Lake. And they envisage that eventually they will build more lines. So they built, there's 4 platforms and only 2 of them were used. And the 2 out of use ones on the outside, the used ones were in the middle and then on the outside, but they were in separate tunnels connected via walkways. They were there fenced off for a long time. And the one at Hauptbahnhof is probably going to remain like this. They've also built a lift and elevator shaft down there now. So they will probably not be able to use it, and they don't intend to use it. There was a similar arrangement at Jungfernstieg. That's the station under the Ulster Lake. But there it's not in a separate tube tunnel, but it's a big station that had 4 tracks, and only the 2 in the middle were used, and the outside ones were not used. But they have since come into use with the U4 line going to the Harbour City.
See. Yeah, I could share the picture that I took of it. I don't remember exactly where I was standing when I.
You could look right into it. You could go to the end of when it was fenced off later. You could ride through the fence and you could take pictures of it. It looked quite eerie. Yeah.
Yes.
There was also an abandoned line at branching off south, which got destroyed in the war. But that's the U-Bahn Hauptbahnhof Süd, the south station that used to have 4 tracks. And now they've widened after the war. They pulled it all down, and now it's 2 large wide platforms. And there is a tunnel section surviving of that. And then there's a station they built in the very northeast, which never saw any service because of the war. And we had to give away some portions of Hamburg in this 1937 Great Hamburg Law. So there was no need for it anymore. And there's at least 1 station that got closed. And trains run through now. And it's difficult to see. It's a bit dark, but it survives.